Back in the 1990s, a new breed of predator was killing women in Kansas. However, his hunting ground was not the streets. His MO embraced a new technology and he hunted his victims online. Known as a Slavemaster, he'd become infamous in the BDSM community and take domination to a whole new level. This is a case of the internet's first serial killer. These are the crimes of John Robinson. Welcome back. Are you ready for another case? You ready to strap in to hear about another horrific human predator who we all wish, I don't know, had just never been born, or maybe just befallen a horrible accident pre-pubescence. Just throwing it out there. Today's case is one that I'm sure some of you have heard about, but I hope that the deep dive I do will do it justice. It's really important that I give it legacy in that context. And also, just to say, as you all know, I research, and my brother researches with me, and we didn't know when to stop with this case. There was so much. We literally could have carried on and done a 5-hour deep dive, but we had to break it down to a point where people would be able to ingest the information, have the take home, and also recognise that we've done those who are affected justice. But like I said, I could have gone on longer than today's video will be. So John Edward Robinson, who was he? Well, he was born in 1943. Should have been a good year. My mother and father were born in that year. He was born in Cicero, Illinois. And he grew up in a working class area. He was the middle child of 5. I'm the middle child. Just throwing it out there. His mother was actually known to be really discipline orientated, so she was a very strict disciplinarian. And that can be difficult when you're growing up because no child wants to be in fear of a parent. It was common in that time frame. Parenting was not as it is today, and the consequence of that is lots of parents ruled through fear. Now, aside from the fact that she had these clear boundaries, it was a different story for his father. His father was an alcoholic, and so we can see that there is a level of dysfunction in the household. And also, when you think about individuals who grow up to be serial killers, particularly those who are organised, they tend to have what we would consider inconsistent parental discipline. So we're seeing that potentially playing out in these roles of both parents in this case. Now, what would you say about him as a boy? Well, actually, I'd say that he showed quite a lot of promise. So he joins the Scouts, he achieves rank of Eagle Scout. That's high. And he did that in less than 2 years. It's pretty much the minimum time that you can ever achieve that level. So this is not somebody without dedication and commitment. Clearly, within his nature at that point, he wants to stand out. He wants to be seen as somebody who is effective. And I suppose we could also argue we can play in about the control level. So wanting to be the top of his game in that circumstance. He didn't just want to be a scout. He wanted to reach the top rank and he wanted to do it in a very quick time. So we can assume early on there is this desire to dominate or at least have a level of control in these circumstances. Bit of trivia. You'll like this, those of us in the UK. Actually, those of us all around the world, but particularly the UK. So when he's 14, he ends up travelling as an Eagle Scout to England. And he sang for the Queen, God rest her soul, at the London Palladium. For those of you who don't know what the London Palladium is in the UK, it's kind of a big deal. It's where all the comedians desperately want to go, and it's where a lot of the Royal Variety performances have occurred. So to arrive at 14 years of age in front of Her Majesty and actually get to sing you're seeing again somebody who's standing out. Also, apparently he met Judy Garland backstage, which would be iconic. A bit of a Judy Garland fan, I'm not going to lie. I know it didn't work out for her in the long term. She was treated horribly and so on and so forth. And there were a lot of people culpable for such abuse of that incredible human being and talent. But I bunked off school a lot. And when I was a kid, a lot of her movies were shown during the periods of matinee, I would call it, which is between 12 and 2 in the afternoon when I was not at school. And usually my parents were unaware because they were at work. And I used to fall in love with all of those stars. I don't know why I'm talking about Judy Garland in that context right now. We are going to get on with the crime case, but I would have liked to have met her. So he's showing all of this incredible early success and this promise. And you can imagine, if you were an onlooker looking in, you would imagine that this boy is destined for great things. Also, we can bring in the psychological context of him wanting to stand out, wanting to be seen. And even though it may have been to do with his absolute promise and his unbelievable voice and his great astute behaviour within the Eagle Scouts, it could also mean that he's good at manipulation at this age. Because if you get chosen to do these things, there is a reasoning behind that being chosen. It could be that you are indeed naturally acclimatized to success and therefore your talents put you there. Or it could be that you know how to get people to give you things that you want. That could be a possibility, that early on we're seeing this manipulation within him. Unfortunately, all this promise just dissipates because he later enrolls at the Quigley Preparatory Seminary in Chicago. And that, for those of you who don't know, is actually a private school for aspiring priests. That's right. He went to a school for aspiring priests. Not that we would ever put priests in a questionable category where crime is concerned. But it doesn't work out for him. Drops out after 1 year, and this is due to disciplinary issues, so we're seeing that his behaviour is declining. And it feels like this is where there is a tipping point in his behaviour pattern. So it's where we start to see a decline and then a repetition. It's almost as if he hooks on to negativity and he plays out that negativity per se. So his education and his employment follow this constant, what I would say, failure of pro-social engagement. So we get to 1961. At this point, Robinson enrolls on a medical radiographer course. This is at Morton Junior College. It's in Cicero. He drops out after 2 years. So even though he's completely unsuccessful on this course of study, he's like, what? Like, I'm totally unsuccessful, but that's not going to stop me. I think it probably should stop you because it's really important that radiographers know what they're doing. Yeah, but I know what I'm doing. What? What are you doing? I'm just going to fake my qualifications. It's not okay. Don't do that. Don't do that. These are people's lives. I've done it and I've got a job. Literally, that's what he does. Fakes his qualifications, secures a job, not only as a radiographer, but he secures a job as a radiographer at a children's hospital in Kansas City. And you think about the most vulnerable in our society, the ones who need safeguarding more than anybody, the ones who don't have a voice and expect adults to be their voice. He's literally putting their lives at risk. And you cannot underestimate the level of con artistry and manipulation in that, because it shows so many different levels and layers to his character. First of all, life isn't important to him. One of those children could be in dire straits because his diagnosis is incorrect, or he takes a particular x-ray inaccurately. These things actually have real weight, and the leverage that he clearly gets is reputationally for himself. He's not concerned about his impact. So we see this narcissism, we see this duplicitous nature, we see this absolute egocentricity in this moment, and we see this gross negligence and gross care of life, children's lives at this moment in time. Now, fortunately, he doesn't actually get to stay in the job very long because, I don't know, everyone around him is like, this guy doesn't know what he's doing. Like, he just got told to do a chest x-ray and we've just got the x-ray. Yeah, what's wrong with the x-ray? It's a kettle. He's x-rayed a kettle. Was it broken? That makes literally no difference to this conversation. He needs to be sacked. So he found out pretty early on that he is somebody who is not qualified, and hopefully the damage is over at that point. But like I said, we're introduced to the mentality of this man. 1964. He's 21 at this point, and he ends up moving to Kansas, and he marries a woman called Nancy Jo Lynch. And to all intents and purposes, early on, they seem to be a relatable couple as far as people looking in think that their lives together is acceptable and okay. They have 4 children together. Truth is, he is unfaithful throughout the marriage. So he isn't somebody who commits, but he's very good at putting on a front. And again, I think that throughout this story today that I'm telling you, one of the big masks that makes him so capable in this scenario is that he's adept at seeming to be a good guy, at seeming to be a convincing businessman, at seeming to be somebody who fits into your community, and in this case, who seems to be a good husband. Now, the family live in a large mobile home community. This is in the Santa Barbara Estates in Olathe, Kansas, and he's relatively popular there. He's considered an ideal family man. He was a doting husband and father of 4. He lived in this affluent area, and he just inserted himself in all the right places. That sounds inappropriate, but just stay with me on this. When it comes down to predators who are clever, they place themselves in circles where they seem popular, pro-social, interested in the community, and certainly at a centre of community life, because if you ever want to be able to give an armour, the armour is given from other people's perceptions. He's a good guy. So it gives you a layer of protectivity. You tend not to be under people's radars to some extent when people think you're a really good man or good woman who's doing all these great things. So he coaches his children's sports teams, he referees his school volleyball games, he's a Sunday school teacher. Of course he is. Of course he is. They just love that one, don't they? Where would a potential serial killer never be found? In a church. Well, I think if you just go back and do some research on a lot of serial killers, they did tend to have a relatively high attendance at such establishments. But there he is. He's teaching the Bible, so to speak, and he's also a volunteer scoutmaster. He's known as this really friendly, congenial guy, community activist. He's actually a founding elder of the local Presbyterian church. So no one's looking in this guy's direction, as far as people are concerned. He's the kind of all-American man who you could trust your children with, basically. And he's also known in the local area as a really successful businessman and a really successful entrepreneur. Sadly, by his community, and indeed his wife, none of them knew who they were really dealing with. This true nature, this malevolent darkness that ran through his veins, this capacity to cultivate a caricature as far as his true nature was concerned, and present that caricature as this really good, committed, connected, community-orientated father and husband. Truth was, he was actually a narcissistic predator, he was a sadomasochist, and he was obsessed, and I mean obsessed with BDSM. And please be aware, if you're watching this and BDSM is your kink, if you literally sat wearing a chain round your neck and your master sat next to you, giving you the popcorn, enjoying a bit of this video content, first of all, give me a thumbs up, write a comment, let me know, subscribe. It's cool. If you're consenting and adults, whatever makes you happy. It's okay. But the minute that you're a sadomasochist whose true connection, whose true predilection with enjoyment for sexual gratification is about causing and inflicting pain of an unwilling party, then we're in a whole different territory. And he would actually go on later down the line to exploit this sexual paraphilia for financial benefit, but also for far worse. So like I said, we're not talking about the BDSM community where it involves consent, care, and empathy towards one another, whatever your kink may be. Also, as I said earlier on, even though his childhood seems to be showing this promise, I genuinely think that early on he was manipulating people. He knew how to be seen as somebody who stood out. He knew how to say the right thing so that people were on the side, hence why he ended up singing for Our Majesty, etc. Because his con man behaviour is really what underpins the majority of today's story, although we're going to cover the killings and all the other horrific things that he was involved in. But it seems to be this adept nature at convincing people, this conniving concept within his psyche that was able to align himself with so many different things that people bought into those things because he was just so convincing. So first of all, he begins a really dodgy series of business practices and financial irregularities, and that actually puts him on the police radar. They start noting that things don't seem to be working out in the way that they should be working out wherever this man goes. So we get to 1969, and this is really where his criminal career, so to speak, as far as the authorities become aware, begins. So he's arrested in Kansas City. This is because he's embezzled $33,000 from a medical practice. That's a huge amount of money in 1969. I mean, you could buy a house for like $2,000. That's a huge amount of money. He'd done this after faking qualifications as a radiographer. We all know he has a penchant for that. But in spite of the fact that he's stolen this huge amount of money and he's totally fabricated his qualifications, he basically gets 3 years probation. Yeah, doesn't go to prison. I mean, what's $33,000 from a medical practice? Well, probably the end of the medical practice. And what is, at the end of the day, faking qualifications as a radiographer? Well, it's kind of life-threatening if nobody finds out. Yes, it's life-threatening if nobody finds out, but they did, so does it really matter? I think a prison sentence would have. Is it just me? I think no, it's just me. Just me. Anyway, this happens. He has probation, and then that same year he ends up working as a systems analyst for Mobil Oil Corporation. Now again, at this point, they should be made aware that he is already in trouble. He's been involved with fraud, without a doubt, but he doesn't tell them. They're not aware he's on probation. And surprise, surprise, because obviously the probation's worked out really well and he's totally rehabilitated now, as you would expect him to be. Yeah, he's fired because he steals 6,200 US postage stamps from the company, which translates as a lot of money. So basically we've seen absolutely no change in his behaviour and he's offending again within months. Then by 1970 he moves to Chicago, and by the way, that's actually in violation of his probation, so he couldn't care less about any of the sanctions that have been placed on him. He does as he wishes, and this is very symbolic again of the psychology of this human being. Because when we talk about narcissism, one of the things we have to remember is, and we band it around the word narcissism a great deal, but an individual character like this that I'm talking about today, he fits it perfectly because he answers to no one. He does not care about consequences. He has a superiority complex that makes him believe that he doesn't have to follow the rules and regulations and laws that everybody else does. He's found out when he's actually conning people, embezzling money, lying about qualifications, and it just has no impact whatsoever. So he moves because he really doesn't feel the need to be controlled by anyone. He's in charge of the world as far as he's concerned. So now he's in Chicago, he starts working as an insurance salesman. Unsurprising, of course, because what do insurance salesmen do? Well, they sell insurance so that people can make claims. And if you look back in the day, we didn't have the computer systems and the forensic detail that we have now. It's quite easy to get away to some degree with fraud. I mean, even when I was a young person, people wrote checks that bounced. As long as they were under £50, you could just write as many checks as you wanted. It took days for it to clear, which meant that somebody could take your checkbook, write loads of bad checks, and at the end of the day, you wouldn't have to pay for it because essentially the banks would cover it because it was fraud. But arguably, it meant that these crimes could be repeated and repeated and repeated until we obviously got the technology we have now. But this is why he's inserting himself in these positions. But unsurprisingly, he gets arrested for embezzlement. Yes, what a surprise. So he's sent back to Kansas City. There is this relentlessness about this man. We get to 1973. He's got a neighbour. So that means he's literally unconcerned about the attitudes of those who he should seek to have a level of respect within. Because you want neighbours to consider you a decent person. It's problematic if your neighbours are going around telling people about all the terrible things that you've done to them. This does not dissuade him at all. And he actually gets this neighbour who is a retired teacher and asks him to invest $30,000. And she does. She never saw that money again. It's a huge amount of money for a teacher as well. Think about this is 1973. If you ever want to look back at wages in 1973, I've got my dad's wage slips from 1973, and I can't believe that anybody could have lived on that money, but they did. $30,000 is like the equivalent of, as my father would say, winning the pools back then. For those of you in other countries, it was a really weird game where you had to decide on how many draws in football games had occurred, and you won like 100,000 at the top prize. But that would literally make you the equivalent of a multi-millionaire in today's money. So she gives him this huge sum, totally ripped off. In 1975, they actually extend Robinson's probation. How long for, you ask? Is it for eternity? Because at this point, it certainly should be. And bear in mind, he's not gone to prison at this point, which is unbelievable. So they extend this probation, and this is because he's had charges of securities fraud and mail fraud, because he's been going around setting up sham medical consulting companies. Then we get to 1977. This is going to blow your mind. He's elected to the board of directors on a local charitable organisation. That in itself says, where's your due diligence? Where's your due diligence? Just like ask around. His neighbour, maybe. Speak to his neighbour, the one whose money he's stolen. At the end of the day, this demonstrates the manipulation I'm talking about. He gets elected to the board of directors of a local charity, and that means that he gets some respectability. People will admire him, but also it will give him a level of power. If you can seem to be authentic, if you can be seen to be an individual of such weight and gravity that people trust you, then you're going to get foot in the door elsewhere. So of course, he takes full advantage of this. He forges letters from its executive director, and he forges them, sending them to the mayor of Kansas City. And in those letters, he names himself as the organization's Man of the Year. Now, the thing about con artists, and this is one of the things that I struggle with, because in the press, often they'll have the victim, oh, I'm the victim of the con artist, and then they'll have the con artist, oh, look at how terrible I am, and indeed that is the case. But sometimes the victims are portrayed in this way where they seem like uber vulnerable, and at times I've even seen documentaries where one could argue that people poke fun at them. A really great example of this is Dr. Phil in the States, where I know we're all about trying to heal people and this will be a changing day in your life. But realistically, it's actually about getting them on and making them see how stupid they are. And at the end of the day, there's this compassion element to it. But that's not how it is. The audience laughs and people like to think they're so different and so on and so forth. It would never happen to me. It's just not true. The reality is that vulnerable victims are just ordinary human beings who are captivated by a personality, who believe that they can trust an individual, who's often selling them a dream that isn't too impossible to believe, and exampling others who've achieved those dreams, and so on and so forth. So it's really challenging when we portray people who are conned by these manipulators as being these vulnerable, weak people. It just isn't true. It doesn't play out in the evidence and the research. Think about what I'm talking around now. This man has got himself elected to the board of directors on a charity. He's now writing to the mayor on basically letters that he's been able to steal, which make it look authentic. And on top of that, he's writing to the mayor himself, asserting himself as this individual. And he's literally putting on an awards luncheon in his own honour. Yeah, he puts an awards luncheon in his own honour for a Man of the Year award that never existed. That's what he did. Think about how massive that is, how convincing that is. No one's going to attend a luncheon with the Man of the Year at an awards ceremony believing that he's behind it all. He isn't the Man of the Year, he's just a massive con artist. It's cultivating this, as I said, caricature of an individual that doesn't really exist. It's as simple as that. Now, around the same time as this, he forms a sham company. It's a hydroponics business. It's called HydroGrow. And he actually goes again and steals $25,000 from a friend who invested in the company, buying into the dream. Like I've said, you don't get more narcissistic than stealing from your neighbours, stealing from your friends. It shows no empathy. It shows an absolute disregard for others' well-being and a willingness to exploit literally anybody. No one is safe around this man. He actually says to that friend that he's going to give him a really quick return, and what makes it nauseating, and it's truly nauseating, that friend that he took $25,000 off to give him a quick return on his book, he needed that money because his wife was dying. It was for her health care. The immorality, the willingness in that moment to exploit the most vulnerable people, to take that money knowing that that man would have sold his soul to heal his wife, to find the funds, to allow her dignity in death, or protection by being given medications potentially he couldn't afford. Robinson knew how to take that from him. It's diabolical. In 1980, Robinson then goes on to take a job as a director of personnel. This is at Kansas City Food Company. It's impossible for this man to go anywhere without immediately causing issues, and he's caught stealing pretty immediately. He's also at this point arrested for embezzlement and for check forgery. The company that employed him, they lost a total of more than $40,000. It's a huge amount of money, which could literally ruin a company. Robinson takes that money, and actually he used part of it to buy an apartment. And the premise of that apartment is, I don't know, not to embezzle funds in an area that may in the future pay for a nice little retirement. That would be inappropriate anyway, but that's not what it's for. It's specifically because he wants to have sexual liaisons with other women, and that's where he can meet them. But what I've just told you, for that horrific action, for that criminal behaviour, for the disrespect and disregard of individuals, including at the company that he was working, who could have been very adversely affected by his actions, he got 60 days in jail. 60 days in jail. Bearing in mind the prior that we've talked about, did he just wear a really nice suit? Was the judge, I don't know, at the golf course at 11 a.m, having a few gin and tonics, a few brandies, went in a good mood, looked at him, said he's got a nice hairstyle, I like the shape of his suit, I don't think we've got to worry about this guy, I've heard he was a decent radiographer. You know what I mean? It worries me. 60 days is nothing. And because He has literally no consequences. And the reason I've gone through this prior behaviour before we move on to, I suppose, the substance of today, which is to talk about the murders that he got involved in as a serial killer, I wanted to highlight it because I'm a massive believer in chain of causation. I'm a huge believer that there are contributory factors in most situations and scenarios. And if we really truly want to understand these kind of behaviours that escalate, we have to understand the things that could have changed the outcome. So contributory factors include things such as being penalised to a degree where the impact is substantial enough to change the course of action of that individual, or offering therapeutic intensity to a point where we believe that that individual has at least changed their ideas about how they're going to behave, with a supervisory element, meaning that they can't just go on after apparently succeeding in therapy and then cause havoc in society. We supervise that. And these kind of mechanisms are the only way that we can really keep people safe. If they don't happen, in this case they certainly don't happen, and the person doesn't even get really a slap on the wrist for these heinous crimes, why will that stop them escalating? Why won't they amplify their behaviour? Why won't their damage become even more substantial? He shows an absolute disregard for human life already. What is going to stop him from believing that he can outsmart the law? What is going to be the thing that changes this course of direction? And the truth is, in this case, absolutely nothing, it seems, at this point. And without consequences, those contributory factors add up, add up, add up, and we get, in Ted Bundy's own words, to the tipping point, to the jumping off point, where fantasy becomes reality. So, as I've said, the criminal justice system has not been effective. And because of that, it seems like he escalates his behaviour. He takes this predatory behaviour that we're seeing to a completely new level. And in 1984, the killings begin. And it's truly terrifying what I'm going to talk about within these murders. Now, we know that at this point he has been on the police radar, but the authorities consider him what's known as a white-collar criminal. It's a disgusting term. It's an absolutely abhorrent term. So what white-collar criminal means is, I don't know, I've stolen £191 million of your money, all you investors, put it in a Ponzi scheme, but then I've got insolvent, I've left the country. What are you going to do? Nothing. I cannot express the amount of time I have spent on scenarios and in scenarios which have involved these kind of individuals who steal, ruin people's lives, embezzle pensions, and so on and so forth, and they don't even go to prison. Sometimes they get struck off as a director for 12 years. Oh my God, really? What will I do while I'm not a director for those 12 years? I don't know. Maybe I'll go to my island that I bought with the £191 million I embezzled. But kids, don't steal sandwiches from Tesco more than 3 times or we'll bang you up for a few months at the minimum. You know, it doesn't make sense. But that's what they consider him. Not a threat, basically. Just financially motivated, not prone to violence. And the truth is, those assumptions were highly incorrect. And secondly, if you could ever have been more wrong, it's demonstrated in their absolute belief at this moment in time that this individual was not a threat to human life. So Robinson carries on with his fraudulent activities that he's engaged in. He sets up 2 more sham companies. This is, of course, under the guise of being a successful businessman. And because he's created this facade, and that's really important to honour and acknowledge in this, that's what he does. The people who come to meet him, they're not fools. They're people looking for a better life. And he's presented an environment where it looks possible. It's like walking into a beautiful looking store and there are the most gorgeous shiny fruits and everything looks perfect. Unless you go up and pick one of those fruits up and realize that it's plastic, you just believe it's great. You believe it's success. You believe that you can trust the person behind the till, right? That's what he manages to do to some degree. He creates a look of success, a look of companies that are effective and efficient. And it's all a way of creating a web and bringing in, luring in his prey. So at this point, he manages to hire 19-year-old Paula Godfrey. Now, she's an honor student. She's a really accomplished figure skater. So this is a high-functioning, clever girl. And the reason that Paula had even arrived in that situation, and like I said, this is him testing out whether this would be an effective method of getting his victims. She'd gone ahead and responded to an advert that had been posted by Robinson in the local newspaper, which is what we used to do back in the day. Anybody under 30, you know newspapers, you probably have them on your phone now in an app. The ones that are good, you pay for. The ones that are bad, you get for free. But at the end of the day, you don't necessarily look in job sections in papers anymore because you go on job sites, right? But when I was a kid, when loads of you watching this today were kids, if you wanted a job, you literally go in the adverts, in the classified or the job sections, and you would have to write or ring and literally organise an interview if you were lucky enough to get to that stage. That's how the world worked. So she trusts that because it's been placed in the paper, it's a trusted source. And everything looks like it's playing out. She's thrilled, absolutely thrilled. Apparently, this is what is reported. Her friends say, and her family say, that she just felt there was a real opportunity here. And the first thing was that Robinson had said that to get her up to speed in the job, they were going to send her away to train in Texas. So imagine how that would be for this young girl. She's succeeded in achieving a goal, which is to get a job. She's being told that the chances are she's going to see the world. And also, she's now really early on in her life, 19. She's going to get to go to Texas and train. She's going to have some authority in what she's doing. And she's telling her friends and family this for a reason. She's proud of herself. That's the last time any of her friends and family see Paula. She literally vanishes without a trace. Now, you will understand that Paula came from a lovely family, a loving and good family, a tight family. So Paula's father, obviously knowing that his daughter is not contactable, he goes and confronts Robinson. He demands to know where the hell his daughter is. And Robinson just says he doesn't know what he's talking about. You see that narcissism? He's not even concerned about an excuse in that moment. She's negligible to him. It's nothing to be concerned about as far as Robinson is concerned. The fact that her father is there wanting to know what's become of his daughter. Now, her parents file a missing person report and the police then go and speak to Robinson. And he says to them, basically, I have no idea where she was. So he tells them, don't know what you're talking about. Don't know why the family are indicating that you need to come here. I know nothing. Few days after they have that interaction with Robinson, conveniently, the family receive a letter. Yeah, from Paula, apparently. Remember those letters that he got her to sign with her signature that were blank? So in this letter, it basically thanks Robinson for his help, states that she's okay, and informs her family that she doesn't want to see them. Now, they can tell that that's definitely her signature because it's authentic, and they can tell that she's the person who must have signed it. But her family aren't buying into it at all. There were not problems in the family. Why would she leave without explanation? Why wouldn't she want to see her family? It's completely out of character. But, and this is, I don't know, mind-blowing. The police look at that and say, well, at the end of the day, she's 19. So it's up to her where she wants to go. It's up to her what she wants to do. And because she's an adult, we're not going to do anything. Yeah. As far as they were concerned, there was no evidence of foul play, They'd now seen a letter suggesting that, I don't know, Robinson's a bit of a hero, isn't it, in this one? And her family don't want to be seen by her ever again. And apparently that makes sense. And the reason that I struggle with this is, I don't know, for a million reasons that would be another 3 hours on a video by themselves. But think about it. How is it possible that the authorities just accept that? How do they not choose to investigate Paula's disappearance further at the time? She vanishes without explanation after going on a training arranged by Robinson. Robinson's a known liar, a known con man. He's got a history of exploiting people. He, when confronted by them, denies any knowledge. A letter then arrives that makes absolutely no sense, conveniently typed aside from her signature. You know, that's something that can be easily forged anyway, especially if you've got her signature for some reason. Or maybe, shall we say, because you've offered her a job, so we have a complete link. Yes, you could forge a signature, or she could have written it out when she came for the job. Now, to date, Paula remains missing, which is horrific. But I genuinely mean it when I say my mind is blown. A loving family with no issues with their daughter has a child who gets a job, who's thoroughly excited by this job, is telling friends and family, feels that this is a new beginning for her career-wise, and then just disappears without trace. The strange guy who's constantly in trouble with the police for white-collar exploitation and manipulation, he says, I don't know anything. But then a letter arrives saying that he must have, because she's thanking him in the letter. And on top of that, it says, by the way, I don't want to ever see you again, family. And then she just disappears into the dust. That makes more sense than the police thinking, hey, maybe this guy is a massive murderer. That, to me, is something that time and time again is a resounding pain within these stories. Because Paula's never been found. We will all know by the end of this what happened to her, but Paula's never been found. Imagine the void in that family and the anger that they must feel about the authorities' lack of integrity, as far as I'm concerned, let alone investigation on that case. We get to Christmas 1984. This is only 3 months after Paula's disappeared. And Robinson, he starts visiting shelters, hospitals. He speaks to social workers as well. And what he says is that he started the Kansas City Outreach Program. And this outreach program, well, it's very selective, shall we say. So he wants to work with young, white, pregnant women or young white women with newborns. Apparently he wants to help them get back on their feet, find them accommodation, selling them the whole dream. Even when he's going around peddling this, some of the social workers are really wary of him. First of all, they note that he's very specific about the selection of person that he wants to meet. Secondly, he seems bizarrely eager to meet these vulnerable young women. And their hackles should have been raised, because this guy is horrific. Get to early 1985, and Robinson goes and approaches another young woman. This is 19-year-old mother of one, Lisa Starcy. Now, she's a struggling single parent at the time. She's got a 4-month-old daughter. The little girl's called Tiffany. Imagine for a predator, could you get anybody more ideal? She's vulnerable. She's in a situation where her marriage to Tiffany's father's broken down. She's not got a lot of money. She's struggling in her life. And Robinson just persuades her to join this outreach program. So he meets her at a women's shelter in Kansas City, and he then puts her and her daughter up at a hotel. Imagine where your mind would be in this moment. This guy seems like a savior. He's paying for you and your daughter to be in a comfortable hotel. Things are looking up. Imagine the excitement that she would have felt, the relief that she would have felt in those moments. Maybe it's going to be okay. Maybe this is what God sent, the answer to my prayers. Now, just like Paul, he promises that he's going to change her life. He's going to give her a job in Chicago, apartment. He's going to give her daycare for Tiffany. All of this feeding into her hopes as a mother and as a woman. Her hope. That's the key, isn't it? Her hope. But there's literally nothing altruistic about this man or this action that he's taking. The last time that her family see Lisa was early January 1985. On the 9th of January 1985, Lisa's mother-in-law, this is Betty Stasi, she receives a telephone call from her daughter-in-law and she's hysterical. Lisa's crying. She's beside herself. She's saying they're trying to take a child from her. They're saying that Betty had claimed that she was an unfit mother. She's saying that they're making me write a signature on 4 pieces of blank paper. And Betty at this point is completely blindsided. She's absolutely not, under any circumstances, tried to get this child taken off her. She says to her, don't sign anything. But at this point, and imagine that Betty is listening to this. She hears Lisa say, here they come now. And Lisa hangs up. Shortly after, Lisa just vanishes without a trace. Her family, of course, well, what do they receive? A typed letter, followed by other typed letters, all allegedly from her. And her mum is so suspicious right from the get-go. First of all, she's not the kind of person who writes letters. She couldn't even type, so why would she be typing? And the shelter itself, they also received one of these really strange letters, and it stated, I want to thank you for all your help. I've decided to get away from all this. I want to make a good life for me and Tiffany. So trying to close doors so that people aren't suspicious, but actually people are suspicious. They may not be connecting the dots, but it doesn't feel right. It smells off. Coincidentally, around this exact time, shall we say, Robinson's just seemingly making other people's dreams come true. So his younger brother and his sister-in-law, Donald and Helen, they had been trying for a child for over 5 years. So that would be unbelievably challenging psychologically and emotionally, without a doubt. And societally, because back in those days, the expectation was that you would have children if you were in a relationship and were married. So they've been trying for the longest time to do this. They're starting to think about privately adopting. And at this point, Robinson, well, he's like, do you know what? I know of a baby that you could adopt. And he tells them that the mother of this child has taken her own life. All the legal formalities have all been sorted. He actually produced documents signed by a lawyer, signed by a judge. And he said, look, all you need to do, if you want this baby, you just need to pay the legal fees of $5,500. Now, that's a lot of money. But my God, if you wanted a baby, if you want to be a parent, then hell and high water is unlikely to stand in your way. So the couple pay the fee. Now, unknown to them in that moment, they became the legal guardians of Lisa Stasi's 4-month-old daughter, Tiffany. Lisa was never heard from again. She also remains missing. So he exploits his own brother and sister-in-law, emotionally and financially. They don't know that they're taking this little baby from a woman who's mysteriously disappeared. They just, in good grace, accept this child into their world with their love, all their dreams coming true in that moment. Now, ironically, at the time, Lisa's daughter was actually listed as missing because, of course, they both disappeared. And that in itself demonstrates the fact that the suspicion is that both of them at this moment in time have likely come to harm. Now, around this time as well, Robinson's just getting involved in loads of different criminal activities in the underworld, so to speak, of the criminal world. So he's got an organised prostitution ring, and this is specifically for customers who are very interested in S&M, and the people who had contact with him, they knew him as JR. And I'm not talking about JR as in Dallas, back in the day, with his 10-gallon hat. I think I remember it right. If I'm not correct and it's not a 10-gallon hat, I apologise. I don't know a lot about cowboy hats. I just know that JR had one. But this is his name. Basically, he's a pimp. He's exploiting women for financial gain. There's no other way of saying it. And the FBI have been following these kind of eventualities occurring in his life. They're watching him to some degree go deeper into the darkness with his actions and behaviours and habits. And the FBI had been consciously aware of this man because of Lisa's disappearance. So they actually decide that they want to send an officer in undercover. So they take a female agent and they put her undercover as a prostitute. The whole premise of this is to expose the prostitution ring. They probably at this point have no idea that he may have killed Lisa. But if he's got this sex organisation and exploitation ring, then arguably she could have been placed in it against her will. So they get this FBI agent, she goes in as a prostitute, and they actually have to stop the undercover operation because they literally believe that that agent may be killed. That's how dangerous it is. And this is the FBI. And even though they're not able to do anything with it in that moment to find out what's happened to Lisa, it gives you a sense of just how awful the things that were going on in that space were for them to remove that agent because they felt that she may die. We get to 1987. Robinson is just following his absolute MO, his usual MO. He hires his 27-year-old mother of one, she's called Catherine Clampett. And she'd moved from her native Texas, she'd gone to find work in Kansas City, and she'd actually left her own child with her parents in Wichita Falls. What happens is Robinson promises her the world, of course. Wonderful things, world travel, new wardrobe, all those trappings. Then she just vanishes without trace. She remains missing too, to this day. Now later that same year, Robinson's, what shall we say, incredibly dodgy business practices catches up with him, and he actually spends 4 years in prison in Kansas. He's on multiple fraud convictions, and then he gets a further 2 years in Missouri, and that's for fraud and parole violations. Thank the Lord, can we just add zeros, maybe 2, onto each of those charges? It's during the second spell of his incarceration that he meets 49-year-old mother of 2, Beverly Bonner. This upsets me that I have to insert this in this story because when you think about an individual working in a prison, I don't know. Firstly, prisoners tend to be there because, well, they're very naughty, or they're very bad, or they may be very violent. All these different things, but the surefire thing that you're going to know if you're working in a prison is those who can't leave are probably people that you should leave when it comes to forming any kind of anything but professional relationship with. But clearly, Beverly Bonner did not get the memo on that. So she's this prison librarian at Western Missouri Correctional Facility. This is where Robinson's being held. And Beverly's husband's actually the prison doctor. Now, Robinson manages to get himself a job in the prison library because he is intelligent and he's also highly manipulative. So that's going to be the perfect place for him, isn't it? Easy job, being in a library, having a level of control. Books are important in prison. And he manages to start a relationship with Beverly, who must have been very bored in her life because her husband was a doctor. I mean, come on, Beverly, life choices. Fraud, corrupt, sex trafficker, doctor. Fraud, embezzler, potential murderer, doctor. I'm going to go with the embezzling potential murderer. Beverly. Bad choice for a whole heap of reasons. But again, let's put Beverly in the concept of being a woman who's a little bit bored. Maybe she hasn't achieved what she wanted in her life. Maybe she's found that she's living a humdrum existence and she's lost a spark. Lots of people feel like that in their relationships. And then this man comes in, he's a great manipulator. He lies to her, tells her all the things that she needs to hear, convinces her he's the one. He can make all of her pain about the possibilities she's never explored or achieved. He can be that person to set fire to those dreams. And you can imagine as a con artist, they're very, very good at doing this stuff. So she gets involved in this relationship. And then when he's released in 1993, she actually leaves her husband, she files for divorce, and she moves to Kansas to begin this relationship with him and also to help him establish a hydroponics business. And she was never seen again. She didn't even attend her eldest son's funeral in October 1995, which is just horrific for the family at large. You know, the wider family unit, the fact that she didn't go, that could well have been seen as an absolute slight on her as a mother. whereas the reality is that she wouldn't have had the capacity to do so. Now, Robinson at this point, he arranges for her alimony checks to be forwarded to a Kansas post office because, of course, what's he going to do? He's going to carry on cashing these monthly for many years. In fact, he does it for several years, and that's $1,000 that he's getting every single month, believing it to go to her, of course. Now, Beverly's family, they aren't okay with her departure. They've obviously been blindsided by her decision anyway, and what they're really struggling with is the fact that they start receiving these typed letters. Now, allegedly they're from her, and these go on for several years, but in 1997, the letters stop arriving, and at this point, they really start to consider that something bad has happened to Beverly. They start becoming really concerned about her, and it's enough concern to actually get them to inform the authorities. It's difficult, I know, when you hear me recount that kind of detail to imagine why the family would not have sooner contacted the authorities. But we have to think about what Beverly did. She left a really notable, respectable partner as far as society is concerned to run off with quite a deplorable kind of human being. And she didn't attend her son's funeral. These are massive markers in people's mindsets about the beliefs they have about an individual. And I'm sure for a period of time, the family would have been confused about who she'd become. And their responsibility towards her would have diminished, not because they didn't love her or care for her, but because they couldn't quite wrap their head around how she had gone from a prison librarian to an individual that they probably didn't recognize. But then when the letters stop, and the reassurances that they felt they could hang on to diminish, they're left with this uneasy feeling, a suspicion that maybe something bad has happened to her. One of the things that Robinson, as we know, is good at doing is making the world work for him. So in the mid-1990s, he actually acquires around 17 acres of land. It's in a really remote Lynn County location, and he moves his trailer onto it. This is in July 1998. During this period, he installs 2 phone lines. One is for his landline and one is for his computers. Again, for those of you who don't remember a time or a life where you didn't have Wi-Fi, for us who are, shall we say, a little bit older, I don't know where that accent came from, sorry. Some kind of bizarre stroke German type accent. Apologies in advance. It just came out. We would have to plug the internet into the wall and then it would dial up like a phone. Apart from it would go like this. That's a really bad impression. That's what I did. It was a lot slower as well. But he's installing this, and he's installing this for a very, very good reason. And that's because, like so many serial killers, Robinson adapts his MO. Remember, an MO is not fixed. We're not talking about a signature here. We're talking about an MO, modus operandi, learned dynamic behavior. They perfect it. They get better at it. He's getting better at his predatory behavior. He's getting better at procuring his prey. And the reason for that is he's learned to embrace the developments in computer technology. He can just sit there at home on his computer, stalking, finding any future victim that he feels fits the paradigm of possibility for his prey. He doesn't need to go around speaking to people about outreach programs he's pretended to create. No. He can sit in the comfort of his own home looking for those vulnerable targets. The rise of the internet was the rise of his weapon. It's as simple as that. Robinson actually sets up 5 computers in his home, and he soon becomes really well known in the BDSM chat rooms. He uses loads of different online names, including his alias Jim Turner. But soon, he becomes known as the Slavemaster. And online chat rooms, they just become his new hunting ground. He starts looking for women, looking for submissive roles in masochistic relationships. And again, if that is your kink, you can do that till the cows come home. As long as you want it, as long as you're willing. And you have to remember, in sadomasochistic relationships, it's a very reciprocal scenario when it's consenting. It's got things like safe words. I don't know, something like clown feet. That's a safe word, isn't it? You say it, it stops, right? Not saying that anyone should use clown feet. Clown feet may actually ruin the moment, to be fair. I don't know why the words clown feet came into my head as a safe word. Clearly, I have not been involved in a world where I need that kind of word. And if I did, safe to say, I would not be very popular. She ruins the moment. It was clown feet this week, then it was bucket toad the next week, then it was biscuit tray. I don't know where this girl's going. Sorry, I digress. On to the more serious stuff. So he advertises now. He finds his next victim relatively easily. It's 45-year-old mother of one. It breaks my heart because women always count no matter what relationship. And when we're talking about mothers, it's just, you steal an entire relationship when you kill somebody who is a mother. And every life is priceless. Please don't think I'm putting additional weight. I'm just saying the loss to a child is just so enormous from a loving parent, a loving mother in particular. So Sheila Faith, she lives in Fullerton, California, and she has a really severely disabled 15-year-old daughter, Debbie. Now, Debbie has numerous conditions. She's got cerebral palsy, she's got spina bifida, she has big issues, and my mum really takes care of her, but she's wheelchair bound, she's incontinent, she needed adult nappies, and Sheila's husband's died. So she's really struggling financially. So what does Robinson do? He swoops in, this successful, altruistic businessman. He offers Sheila a job. He says he's going to pay her daughter's medical expenses, which I cannot even imagine what that must be like. A lot of you watch from the States, and I know it's very different for you there. In the UK, we have the NHS. It's totally imperfect, but it's there. At the end of the day, we may not have a brilliant system, but we have a system that can catch you when you fall. And we don't pay more than what we pay on our taxes. And it's hard to imagine how blessed you are with that until you see other people in other countries who can't even afford insulin for their children's diabetes. It's heinous because the pharmaceutical companies are so corrupt and they don't care about people, they care about profit. We don't have that in the UK, we're so lucky. But you can imagine for this woman, she's suddenly got a guy saying, I'm going to sort it all out for you. And she cares about a child. He would be a knight in shining armour, brighter than any armour she'd seen before. And she's sad and lonely, she's lost her husband. So Sheila and Debbie, of course, they leave their home, they move to Kansas City. This is in 1994. Never seen again. Never seen again, just disappear. Robinson would, of course, go on to cash Sheila's social security checks for the next 7 years. That comes to almost $100,000. Now, after she disappeared and her daughter disappeared, of course, what happens? Well, her family get letters, loads of typed letters. Allegedly, they're from Sheila, of course, but they're really suspicious. First of all, Sheila didn't type. She wrote letters by hand, and also over time, they felt like the signature had started to be forged. It didn't coordinate with their memory of the authentic signatures that they knew from her. So we get to 1997, and Robinson, of course, has perfected his MO. He meets 20-year-old Isabella Lewica in a BDSM chat room. She's a Polish immigrant, she's an art student, and she's living in West Lafayette, Indiana. She'd moved there when she was 11 with her family. She had quite a heavy interest, shall we say, in alternative lifestyles. These included paganism, goth culture. They're what I was interested in as a young person. I still like a bit of paganism, I'm not gonna lie. I read runes, for example. I like a bit of the alternative, but also she was into BDSM, and this gave him access to her. So he follows his usual pattern. He portrays himself as this really successful businessman. He's going to look after her. He offers her a job. But on this occasion, it won't just be an ordinary job. He'll be her employer, but he'll also be her slave master. And he wants to train her to actually become a dominant as opposed to a submissive. So as part of this, she actually signs a 115 item slave contract. Like what happened in 50 Shades of Grey, but on steroids, I suppose. Now this effectively means that Robinson controls every aspect of her life. This includes her finances. And for a lot of people that may seem extreme, but in the BDSM world, contracts like this actually do play out. And part of that is about boundaries. People will agree or disagree with certain facets of it and aspects of it, and then come to a collaborative agreement on what they're willing to deal with and do. But where Robinson is concerned, there would be a lot of domination without a doubt. And like I said, he's coercively controlling her as well by taking money from her. Now, just like all the other victims before her, Isabella moves to Kansas City. This is in June 1997. This is, of course, despite the fact that Robinson is still married to Nancy at the time. Yes, I literally said that. He's still married to Nancy at the time. And he gives Isabella an engagement ring in spite of this, and he also buys a marriage license, but apparently it'd never be collected. And Isabella down the line did actually tell her parents that she got married, but she never actually informed them of who she'd married. She didn't tell them her husband's name, and they never saw their daughter again. In the summer of 1999, she just vanished. And like the families of Robinson's other victims, Isabella's parents continue to receive emails at this point. Again, they're allegedly from her, but they note straight away there is such a transition in the way that she speaks to them in these emails. So for example, when she usually writes to them, they tend to be abrupt, short, even abrasive is a term that's used when they're talking in the research I've looked at regarding how she communicated with them. So that short and abrasive correspondence, it isn't like that anymore. The communications between them, she's really polite, she's really respectful. And they actually said that those kind of communications are completely out of character for her. But we can see this construction of a relationship that somebody doesn't know, trying to parody it in reality. So that's what Robinson's doing. He's imagining and repurposing a relationship to try to cover his tracks, so to speak, and he's doing it badly. Robinson, whilst we know on one level is meant to be in a relationship with this girl who is meant to be writing to her parents, is actually talking to workmates saying that she isn't even in his life anymore. She's been deported. She's been smoking marijuana, got caught, and she's been removed from the country. Not sure that works. Just going to throw it out there, Robinson. Just going to throw it out there. I don't think deportation works like that. I think you'll find if you have a settled status in the USA and you get caught smoking weed, you might get a penalty. You might even get some probation, like you did. You might, if they're very naughty and they have a lot of it, get sent to prison. You're not going to get deported away from the family who literally lives in the States. But that's what he's telling people, because he's trying to create and cultivate this idea that she's no longer around and make sense of that. Soon after she disappears, he meets another victim. Again, BDSM chat room, 28-year-old licensed practical nurse, Suzette Troughton. She's the youngest of 5 kids. She comes from a really close-knit family. And I would say that in spite of the fact that there's this very close-knit relationship between her and her siblings and her parents, the family didn't know that she had this interest in BDSM. Actually, she was very active in the BDSM community. She even had her own web page, and she even travelled all over the US for sexual encounters. She'd place personal ads and they'd all be about seeking a position as a slave. So at this point, Robinson persuades her to work as a carer for his elderly dad, Papa John. He offers her $60,000 salary. He offers her extensive travel. Of course, what this young woman doesn't realise, what this trusting individual who has clearly had good experiences in the BDSM community does not comprehend, is that she's working with this serial killer. That she's connecting with a man who not only is lying to her about this package, he's lying to her about his father's existence. Robinson's father had died several years earlier. And just like Isabella, she agrees she'll be Robinson's submissive sex slave. So she moves from Michigan to Kansas. This is in 2000. And of course, she wants to travel the world with him. Yeah, she's going to be his slave. She's going to get $60,000 a year. She's going to see the world. Her mother, Caroline, she last spoke to her on 1st of March 2000. Now, whilst her daughter is apparently on her travels, Caroline starts receiving emails. She receives letters from her. And again, the letters are typed and they're signed at the bottom. And it really stands out to Caroline. She's really suspicious. First of all, there were literally no spelling mistakes. And she said that was really out of character for Suzette. They were also not written in the way that Suzette would word them. And she said on top of that, the men have been mailed from abroad, but every single one of the envelopes either had a Kansas City or a California postmark. And in one of the letters, the name of Suzette's dog had even been spelled incorrectly. Now, Suzette was really close to her mother. She spoke to her every other day. But Caroline never heard from her daughter again. That in itself is so difficult to even comprehend. To have silence from your child that you speak to all the time and then have these inconsistencies play out in the communication between you that's now on email or letter. To know this is wrong, but not really be able to place what was happening, but just to, as a detective within your mind, so to speak, recognize that something dire had occurred must have been devastating. Now, of course, time passes and more time passes and Suzette is not in touch with her mum. So she goes ahead, notifies the authorities and she says, listen, could you please find my daughter's 2 Pekingese dogs, Pika and Harry? She said they absolutely meant the world to her daughter and she would never have left without them. Now, the police, through records regarding abandoned dogs, they were able to discover that 2 Pekingese dogs had been found abandoned at a trailer park where Robinson lived on the 1st of March 2000. That's the same day that Suzette disappeared. Now, animal control, they'd taken them away, and what the police managed to do was to trace one of the families who'd adopted one of the dogs. When the officer went in, they said the name Pika, and its ears pricked up, its tail started wagging. It ran to him. Clearly Suzette's dog. And it's at that moment in time the police think this isn't going to have a good outcome. They start believing that the reason that Suzette hasn't been in contact is because Suzette's dead. Now, the authorities obviously have a hard job here. They've got to go and tell Caroline that one of the dogs has turned up. It recognised its name. They're suspicious that something bad may have happened to her daughter. And they ask her essentially to help them in the investigation. They get her to call Robinson to record the conversation. And she obviously is going to ask him about when he last saw Suzette, ask him about the job. And during that call, Robinson actually tells her that Suzette hadn't taken the job offer. In fact, he goes so far as to claim that she'd stolen money from him and that he'd ran off with another man, Jim Turner. Yeah, one of Robinson's aliases. And again, even though this man is highly organised in many ways, when it comes down to his reactions in these circumstances, it kind of blows a cover as far as I'm concerned. There is nothing sophisticated about this constant, oh, the person didn't take the job. Oh, the person never turned up for the job. Oh, the person stole money from me when they should have been working for me, and so on and so forth. You know, placing himself either as somebody who didn't know or was a victim in circumstance. It just doesn't make sense. But then the narcissist doesn't really care about being found out, as does the psychopath. They're quite comfortable with being seen as a liar. But this lack of sophistication is clearly something that is going to prick the conscience of the police, who already believe that something bad has happened to Suzette. So the police begin to monitor Robinson's movements. I don't know. At last, can we just say that? Can we just say the police begin to monitor Robinson's movements at last? Should have been following them, I don't know, for 10 years. They find out that he's in contact with women literally all over the US. He's arranging sexual liaisons with them. He's putting them up at hotels, just like he'd done with all the earlier targets I've talked about today. Now, the detectives, they end up renting adjoining rooms because they are hugely concerned that there's a really strong possibility he's going to take one of those women back to his home and he's going to kill them. They also go ahead and put a wiretap on his mobile phone. And the police do finally move in when they suspect that he's actually planning on taking this particular individual back to his farm. This is in Lynn County, Kansas. So they intervene because just like before, when the FBI sent the undercover agent in, they see that this individual has got dire potential, and they certainly don't want any other women to have their lives potentially ended by who they suspect is a killer. Now, thank God, after all this playing out, Robinson does get arrested. This is on the 2nd of June 2000. And ironically, his arrest coincides with 2 other complaints. These are from 2 separate women who both are complaining about sexual battery. But also one of the women, Vicky Newfield, she's actually complaining on top of this that he's stolen her sex toys. So she had sex toys that he kept, and they were worth around $700. I'm only smiling because we all like a good sex toy. You know, they're great. I don't deny that. But I'm just wondering, what kind of sex toy is $700 worth? I mean, leave it in the comments if you know. Googling it later on. I digress. Just saying, there's a lot of sex toys. He kept them. She wasn't happy. She had actually met him, as you would imagine, on the BDSM site. He sent her a slave contract. You know, he likes his contracts, doesn't he? She reviews it, and then she actually went and visited him in Kansas. This is when they get involved in BDSM. They have sex a lot of times, and it is at this point consensual, of course. She then returns to Texas, but Robinson asks her to leave those sex toys with him because he wants an incentive for her to return. Because as far as he's concerned, she is permanently moving back to Kansas to be with Robinson. And he even said to her, as an incentive again, that his business would cover the cost of her move. But the movers never arrived, and she lost her sex toys. But let's be honest, if she had gone there, the chances are she would have lost her life as well. So thank God she never got the opportunity to go back to his home. So that theft allegation, this is interesting and fun for us because it gives the police what's known as probable cause. You need probable cause to search somebody's property, and they have it. Apparently, he's ran off with somebody's dildos and they're not having that. No, 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 sir. We want those dildos back. I would love to have been one of the officers at the door just to have been able to say something like that. Anyway, this theft allegations happened. Now they can go and search the property. So the same day that he's arrested, the police begin searching the family home. This isn't a laugh. And wow, there's so much incriminating evidence because he's got lots of items that are linking him to several missing women. So the items actually include books on creating false identities, credit cards bearing the names James A. Turner, which is his alias. They found IRS statements that belonged to Sheila and her daughter Debbie Faith. They found hotel receipts with Lisa Stasi written on them. They had an IRS form signed by Beverly J. Bonner. They found handwritten notes with missing women's email addresses and their families. They found emails between Robinson and Suzette Troughton. I mean, literally linking him to all of those individuals that I've just listed that are known to be missing. But it gets worse. So they're searching a storage unit. This is one that Robinson rented in Elath. And at this point, police find lots of items belonging to Suzette. This includes her social security card. They find her driver's license. They find a birth certificate. They find her jewelry. They find a journal. They also find that sex slave contract that she's signed. And also they find tapes where she's having sex and also nude photographs of her. They also find property belonging to Isabella, belonging to Sheila and her daughter. All of this is discovered in the unit. And this is along, by the way, with Vicky's missing sex toys, which I suppose for her is a good thing that they've turned up. But the following day, they carry on this search, because this is an extensive search now. They know. They're not just looking for links to these missing women because they want to turn these missing women up elsewhere. It's because they know that they're dealing with a man with such macabre intention and potential that this is unlikely to return women who are alive. So the 3rd of June 2000, they actually have a complete sinister turn in what they're finding. They're searching Robinson's Lynn County property in Kansas, cadaver dogs. They pick up something straight away. They focus their attention on 2 yellow 55-gallon metal barrels. And when the police go over and they, move one of the barrels, instantly blood starts to run down the side of them. And they open it, and their worst fears are confirmed. Suzette's naked, partially decomposed body. It's lying in the fetal position. She's got a blindfold made of nylon rope tied around her head with a piece of cloth underneath that had slipped down. It was covering her nose, it was covering her mouth, and they were able to instantly see that there was this oval-shaped defect just on the left side of the head. The autopsy actually later established that it had been caused by blunt force trauma, and it was likely a hard object, most probably a hammer, as far as they could find. That was what they considered the likely weapon that killed her was. Then they find the second barrel, another body, partially decomposed remains of Isabella. She's also lying in this fetal position. She's actually partially covered with a pillow. She's got this short sleeved nightshirt on, and she's got 2 blunt force injuries to the skull. So this is turning into a serial killer scene. They're searching through Robinson's rubbish at home, and then they find a bag of shredded documents. And do you know what? They painstakingly reassemble the pieces. They literally put it together like a jigsaw. And at this point, they're able to find out that he has another storage lockup. So he's actually taken out a place and tried to avoid any evidence being shown for that place, but the police figure it out. It's in Raymore, Missouri. So they go straight there. When they search that lockup on the 5th of June 2000, wow, just more and more horrifying discoveries. First of all, they enter it and they can smell death. Simple as that. They know. They know that they're going to find bodies. And they also find nude photos of Isabella in BDSM poses. They've got videos of Robinson and Suzette indulging in S&M sex. And they also find 3 more metal barrels. Those metal barrels contain the bodies of Beverly Bonner, Sheila Faith, and a disabled daughter, Debbie. Robinson had literally covered the barrels in a plastic sheet, and he tried to disguise the smell of decomposing bodies with cat litter. I'm going to throw it out there. I'm not going to give anybody advice on how to get away with the perfect murder. I'm just going to say I have 2 cats and I use a really good cat litter, and it doesn't disguise the smell of cat piss. I don't know what he was thinking, imagining that his catlet would manage to deal with decomposition. But like I said, narcissists, they seem clever in many ways, but they're often missing the sophistication that is required to actually understand the gravity of their actions and the consequences those actions will create. So they don't necessarily invest in the forensic detail that would be required to essentially get away with these kind of murders, which is a good thing. As I always say, Mother Nature likes to leave chinks in the armour so that the good people of this world can exploit those who fail and fall foul of our laws in the long term. And that's what he does here. Now, obviously, this is a complete shock because they're turning up all of these women that have been dead, some for years. Beverly had been dead for around 7 years. So her body as well is clearly in an advanced state of decay. But they are able to find out that she, like the others, suffered significant head trauma, so most likely from a hammer. Sheila's body, again, similar state of decomposition. She'd also suffered head trauma. She had a broken right arm as well, but she had no defense wounds. Suggests she wasn't ready for the attack. She wasn't expecting it. And Debbie's body, her disabled daughter, she was still wearing her adult nappy. She again had been dealt 3 blows to the head with a hammer-like object. So he's used this same measure of killing on all of these women. It's at this point that, understandably, the investigators realise that Robinson is absolutely responsible for deaths of more women than they'd initially suspected. They'd not been aware, for example, that Beverly, Sheila or Debbie were even missing. You know, Robinson had carried on sending emails, letters that were allegedly from them. So no missing persons reports had ever even been filed. Following the search of Robinson's home and office, authorities were able to figure out how he'd gone about fooling his victims' families. So they discover the blank stationery paper that's got Suzette's signature on them. They find templates that Robinson's used for correspondence. The police realise at this point they're dealing with a serial killer who's been operating for almost 2 decades. Robinson ultimately is charged with 5 counts of murder. The autopsies are able to establish that all of the women, they had died from blunt force trauma to the head. It's most probably with a hammer. But he's also suspected in the 1980s disappearance of Paula Godfrey, Catherine Clampett, Lisa Starcy, and her daughter, Tiffany. Remember Tiffany? And this is where authorities are completely blindsided, because during the interrogation of Robinson, he reveals that Lisa's daughter, Tiffany, the little 4-month-old who disappeared in 1985, she was living with a Midwestern family. And investigators soon discover that the family in question were Robinson's brother and sister, Donald and Helen. Now, the couple, with respect, they had in fact began to question their adopted daughter's parentage following Robinson's arrest. Now, Tiffany was 15 at this point. She'd grown up as Heather Tiffany Robinson, and she had been told that she was adopted, but they also let her know that they didn't know anything about her true past or her biological mother. Now, incredibly, Robinson had even been a constant feature in that girl's life. This murderous manipulator who without doubt snuffed out the life of the mother that she should have been offered the opportunity to love and grow with. He'd been known to her as Uncle John. Can you imagine that? Her mother's killer in her world used the words uncle to associate with that inhumane excuse for a being. All the while, every time he'd see her, she would be the memento. He'd relive it. He'd see what he'd done to her mother again and again and again. All the while, this child growing up without the parent who loved her, who struggled, who wanted a better life for that child. In fact, one of the reasons that her mother died was trying to find that life for the both of them. Now, Heather said that growing up, she always felt that Uncle John gave her the creeps. But it's awful to imagine that he undoubtedly killed her mum when she was just 4 months old, and then arranged his own brother and sister-in-law to adopt her and charged them for that. The police actually had to go ahead and check out the story, so they get Heather's prints from the known prints of Tiffany, and they matched. So the authorities were able to establish that Donald and his wife had no idea at all that the adoption had been illegal, because they are victims too, aren't they? They had their prayers answered, and this little beautiful bundle of joy arrived in their world, and they devoted themselves to her. And then they find out that the person who brought her into their life was actually responsible for her own mother's demise. They finally legally adopted Heather when she was 18, because bear in mind, Heather was loved. It's not as if her life was tragic. It began tragic, and her own biological family were denied, and the fact that her father's family were denied, all of these things were denied, but at least she was absolutely doted on. So when Lisa's mother actually heard that her granddaughter was alive, because bear in mind, it wasn't just Heather's adoptive parents finding out that this is how she'd arrived in that scenario. Now the police have to inform all parties that she isn't missing. She's actually alive and well. And Lisa's mother hears that her granddaughter's alive, and she says, if our granddaughter is safe and happy, and these people have nothing to do with Lisa's disappearance, and they've taken care of this child, we don't want to take her away. But we want her to know that we're her family and we love her. I cannot express to you how emotional that makes me feel. I do not know how I would be able to deal with humility on that level as she does. We're talking about a woman whose child has been murdered, whose grandchild has been stolen. And when she finds out that that child of her child is alive and well, she doesn't want to run in and take her, claim her back. She just cares that she's happy. And I don't know where she would have the strength. She blows my mind. Absolutely blows my mind. Now, Heather did go on to meet her biological grandmother, and the two became really close. And she later read Heather the words that Lisa had written in a baby book for her. So the fact is that Lisa had actually created this baby book, and her mother had kept it so that one day, if Heather Tiffany had ever returned, she'd be able to show her how loved she was. Lisa wrote this to the little girl that she would be denied the opportunity to bring up. When you are old enough to read this, I hope you will still be feeling the love I have for you, because it's a love stronger than life itself. I think for any parent out there who can relate to that, it is so absolutely correct. It's a love that's so profound, so unique, that when you give birth to your first or second or third child, you are blindsided by every emotion that you are given to connect with that baby, and you would die in the blink of an eye for their protection. I can't imagine what that must have been like for Heather Tiffany to be able to hear in her own mother's words the gravity of the feeling that she had towards her when she was a little girl. We get to October 2002. At this point, Robinson is on trial in Kansas. He's on trial for 3 murders. This is including that of Lisa Stasi. I don't think we need a trial. I'm just going to say it now. Can we just put him in prison immediately? Which prison, Emma? I don't care. As long as... Have you seen Saw? The horror movie Saw? Yeah, the horror. I can't watch it. I've seen bits. Have you seen Saw? Yes, I've seen Saw. The one where you can literally escape. You can escape, but there tends to be some pretty severe things that have to be overcome to escape. Yes, but you can escape. You can. I think he should go to a prison where he can escape. Like in Saw. Escape. But not just one room. He has to get through 45. I like where this is going. Just saying. Anyway, they went to the expense of having a trial. So on the 29th of October 2002, he was found guilty on all counts. I smile because it's a good thing. In January 2003, he's also sentenced to death for 2 of these murders. I know we're all in different places around the death penalty, but I'm just saying, if anybody fitted the death penalty, if there was a pen portrait of possibility for the death penalty, if we were looking for a kind of character, should the death penalty be appropriate, just let's say you don't think the death penalty is okay, but you have to come up with an idea of what would fit the crime, even though you disagree with it. Can we all agree there'd be a picture of him, probably next to an electric chair, an injection, other alternative methods, shooting gallery? I don't know. I don't know whether they do that. Just throwing different kind of ideas there about death. I'm just saying, if we have to have the death penalty, I think he would certainly fit the required description of somebody who deserved it according to the law. And because you will know in the States, there are lots of ups and downs around whether a penalty of death will be upheld, lots of arguing against it, for example, which I understand. A lot of people say there can't ever be a just killing. There is no justice in killing, because arguably then you're lowering yourself to the person who's actually carried out killings before you. But like I said, I totally appreciate why the death sentence is passed, and certainly in these circumstances, these individuals do not cause me to lose sleep in their demise. So the Kansas Supreme Court, they uphold that death sentence in 2015. Now, following the Kansas trial, understandably, there are all these other girls that have gone missing. So Robinson faces another further trial in Missouri, and there's another 5 counts of murder. He ultimately agrees a plea deal with prosecutors. He didn't explicitly plead guilty, but effectively he admits responsibility for the 5 killings. The reason that he did that essentially is so that he avoided any further death sentences, and instead he was sentenced to life without parole on those counts that I've just mentioned. Now, as part of that plea deal, and can we just bear in mind what a plea deal is? Do I think that people deserve to get plea deals? Yes, at times, as long as they make sense and often have conditions associated with bringing certain closures and understanding for victims' families. That's really important. And this guy is going to die according to the sentences that have been passed. So there's not really a point giving him loads more death sentences. You can only die once. At the end of the day, a plea deal could be orchestrated so that he allows the families a sense of what happened to their loved ones, and also allows them to be brought home because the bodies are found. So that plea deal is made so that he can reveal the location of the missing bodies. But he ultimately refused to disclose this information. Now, this is where I have a bit of a problem with the plea deal situation, because this is how it should go. Do you understand the terms of your plea deal? Yeah. Do you understand that if you break a plea deal, you will be put to death, because we have a plea deal saying that you are going to give us the victim's location so we can bring them back to the family? Yeah. If you don't, you know what's gonna happen. I know. Just saying. You go back to your cell, figure that out, we'll move on. Hello? He's done what? Okay, give me 2 minutes. Charlie, fire up the electric chair. I got one for you. That's how it should go. That's how it should go. Again, if you don't believe in the death penalty, I understand fully. I'm just saying on the terms of the plea deal. But yeah, it just keeps the power. Of course he does. Imagine how delightful that is for him. He's manipulated a situation where he's got a plea deal and arguably he still has control over those families. That's where I have a problem with these kind of scenarios. Robinson's probably one of the most organised serial killers I've talked about. You know, he blended into his community, he's well liked, he's respected. It's all a facade, of course. He was a con man, sexual deviant, murderer, pathological liar beyond belief. He knew exactly how to manipulate people. He knew how to control them. And he was great at telling people what they wanted to hear. And that is something that makes the vast majority of us vulnerable. His MO, as I said, evolved over time, learned dynamic behaviour. You know, he used to hunt his victims online. He was the first serial killer to do that. And throughout this, I've highlighted narcissism because this guy takes narcissism to a whole new level. He uses victims in every single way. So he'd sexually dominate them using those BDSM activities. He'd then use lies, deceit to control them. Then he'd kill them and then exploit them after death. He benefited financially from them. Complete psychopathic mindset, completely self-serving. You know, all that mattered was fulfilling those desires. People were just collateral damage. As far as I'm concerned, you've got to suspect that Robinson kept the bodies of his victims in those barrels as trophies. You know, he could have disposed of them easily. But that was the ultimate for him, wasn't it? The slave master, deciding whether you'd live or die. And bear in mind the way that these women were killed. It's likely that they were probably engaging at the time in some kind of BDSM activity and therefore they couldn't fight back. They were not prepared and then he would smash them in the heads, ultimately taking their lives without them realising that was going to occur in many of the cases. Maybe not all of them, but many of them. I believe that he will have revisited those bodies again and again and again, like Ted Bundy, like the Green River Killer. The requirement for those individuals who live in this despicable way to relive the moment again and again and again. It's ultimate power, domination, control, stealing them away from their families and then keeping them there as they decomposed around him. Robinson, well, he remains on death row in Kansas. He's 78 years of age now. The bodies of 3 of his victims haven't even been found. That includes Lisa Stasi. And let's be honest, because we know how effective he was at what he did, the truth is that authorities are likely to never really know his true body count. That's what makes this kind of killer so dreadful, despicable, terrifying, so absolutely beyond any kind of redemption in my mind. I hope you found this case at least interesting when we think about how inappropriately this manipulative predator was noted to be by the authorities at the get-go. If there had been some kind of intervention, those contributory factors that form these predators, these killers, may not have made a difference, but it may. That kind of intervention early on, consequences early on, maybe. I'm not saying definitely. There are many parts of my being that scream that this man was a natural born killer. He was born to be this man, this predator, this waste of human space and energy. Let me know your thoughts. As ever, the victims in this case are who we have to care for. I'm glad that Heather Tiffany has had a loved life and has found her true roots. She's an absolute victim in this, as is everybody whose lives were ruined and touched by this heinous human being. All I can say before I go is, fundamentally, as an individual who has a belief system that I have, I imagine that the nice little elevator to hell will be nice and warm when he takes his last breath. Whether it's taken for him or whether it's taken in more natural circumstances in prison, I wish only on him a eternity of indescribably hot torment. He may have liked BDSM in this world, but I bet the devil's got a whole other type waiting for him down below. I imagine David Parker Ray, the toy box killer, also found a similar experience when he arrived. We'll never know for sure, but that keeps me warm at night. Take care, my lovelies. Give me a like, give me a comment, get involved with the chat, and be back Wednesdays, Sundays, every single week. I am crime and consistency. Thank you to all my Patreon subs. Thank you to all my YouTube subs. Without you, I can't make this content because, as you know, a lot of it's demonetized, and you enable me to be able to do so. I adore you. What is that accent? It keeps coming into these. I adore you. I don't know. Am I trying to be a bit like Dick Van Dyke? Is it Dick Van Dyke? Maybe I am. I don't know. Actually, I think I sound like somebody off The Only Way is Essex then. Another British programme. I digress. Goodbye. Be safe.